Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited about where we're going today.
Same here. Today we are taking you right to the battlefields of ancient Greece to explore a really captivating piece of military history.
A piece of history that, quite honestly, messes with everything we thought we knew about archaeological discovery.
Exactly. We're talking about the Illyrian type helmet. So I want you to close your eyes for a second.
Always a good way to start.
Right. Just imagine the sensory reality of a battlefield in the ancient Mediterranean world.
The dust kicking up into your lungs.
The sun just beating down on all that heavy metal,
Yeah.
and standing right in front of you, stepping into the chaotic fray of a phalanx, is a warrior.
You have to look at what they're wearing on their head.
It is a gleaming, solid bronze helmet. It sweeps smoothly down the back to protect the neck, and the cheek guards extend forward to protect the jawline.
But the face.
The face is completely open, just staring right back at you. It offers this terrifying, unobstructed view of the person who is, well, about to try and kill you.
It's an intense image. And if you are familiar with classical antiquity, you might point at that iconic piece of bronze armor and immediately identify it as the famous Illyrian helmet.
It has a very definitive, almost romantic ring to it, Illyrian.
It does. And you would logically assume, given that established nomenclature, that we know exactly who made it, where it came from, and that it was the pride and joy of the ancient Illyrian tribes of the Balkans.
But history loves a curveball.
Oh, it really does. It's a perfect example of how the archaeological record can be incredibly deceptive.
The story of this specific helmet is immensely more complicated than its simple name suggests.
Right, because we are looking at an artifact that forces us to question how we categorize historical data entirely.
So our mission today, we're pulling from a comprehensive stack of archaeological and historical research regarding what is technically categorized as the Illyrian type helmet.
Then we're going to untangle this massive web of ancient military research and development.
We're going to map out its geographic spread across the ancient world, tracing the trade routes, the ancient arms races.
And we're going to dive headfirst into a massive modern naming controversy.
Which is honestly my favorite part. We're looking at how a vital piece of battlefield technology evolved over hundreds of years, and why the name we all use for it today is technically a historical mistake.
For you listening right now, consider this a masterclass in how information is categorized. It shows how technology improves through violent trial and error.
And more importantly, it's a story about how names and labels can completely misrepresent reality.
Which is highly relevant in our modern world of information overload. We often just consume a headline, or in this case, a museum placard, and assume we possess the entire narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this physical artifact first.
Yeah.
What exactly are we looking at when we talk about the Illyrian type helmet in its mature form?
Well, the physical definition is quite specific. It's a style of bronze helmet that, especially in its later variations, completely covered the top and back of the head.
Extending down to protect the neck.
Right. But the defining feature, the architectural choice that really sets it apart from other famous ancient helmets, is that it was open-faced in absolutely all of its evolutionary forms.
And that open face is the critical engineering divergence.
It really is. I mean, when visualizing ancient Greek armor, the default image for most people is usually the Corinthian helmet.
The one with the narrow eye slits and that solid bronze nasal guard.
Exactly. It completely encloses the head like a metal fist. The Corinthian design prioritized maximum physical protection above all else.
But the Illyrian type took a completely different philosophical approach to ancient warfare. It left the face exposed.
Which might initially seem like a fatal vulnerability, when you're facing a literal wall of iron-tipped spears.
But this was a highly deliberate design choice. It was aimed at preserving the wearer's critical sensory inputs.
Vision and respiration. You need those in the crushing, claustrophobic environment of close-quarters combat.
Absolutely. Now, we should establish where this design actually originated. Because if it bears the name Illyrian, the natural assumption is that it hails from Illyria.
Which was the ancient region bordering the eastern Adriatic Sea.
But the archaeological consensus completely contradicts this.
Completely. The evidence points to an origin in the Peloponnese, right in the heart of ancient Greece.
The geographical origin is firmly rooted there, with the timeline placing its initial development during the 8th and 7th centuries BC.
Specifically, archaeologists pinpoint the window between 700 and 640 BC for its emergence.
To put that into perspective for anyone obsessed with ancient warfare, this is the Archaic period of Greece.
A time when city-states were just beginning to formalize the hoplite style of warfare.
The tactics that would come to define the classical era. We are talking nearly 3 millennia ago.
And this design didn't just manifest out of thin air.
No, it has a direct, traceable archaeological parent. It evolved from something called the Kegelhelm.
Or the Kegel-type helmet.
Right, which dates back slightly earlier in the Archaic period and was found primarily in Argos.
Let's look at the mechanics of that transition. What was the Kegelhelm, and why did it need to evolve?
Well, it's a fascinating, somewhat primitive piece of armor. Visually, it was conical.
Hence Kegel, which is German for cone.
Exactly, and it was often constructed from multiple pieces of bronze riveted together.
Which is a huge problem. It provided basic head protection, but from a metallurgical and structural standpoint, rivets are weak points.
If a heavy sword or a spear strikes a riveted seam, the sheer blunt force can pop those rivets,
Causing the helmet to fail catastrophically right when you need it most.
So the timeline of technological evolution here is crucial. The basic form of that early Kegelhelm didn't vanish entirely, it transitioned.
Armorers began figuring out how to raise a helmet from a single sheet of bronze, eliminating those weak riveted seams.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It requires immense skill. But the basic silhouette of the Kegelhelm remained, evolving into the seamless, more protective form we now call the early Illyrian type.
Just think about the metallurgical skill required to take a single flat billet of bronze and hammer it into a perfectly contoured, hollow shape that fits a human skull.
Without the metal cracking or thinning out too much at the dome, it's staggering.
And we actually have a strong theory about where these master smiths were working. The earliest Illyrian-type helmets were developed in a workshop located in the northwestern Peloponnese.
The primary candidate for this location being ancient Olympia.
Which blew my mind. We usually associate Olympia purely with the athletic games and religious sanctuaries.
Right, running tracks and temples.
But the idea that it also hosted a high-tech bronze workshop, like an ancient military R&D center, adds a completely different dimension to the site.
But it makes perfect logistical and economic sense when you analyze the function of Olympia in the ancient world. It was a Panhellenic sanctuary.
Every 4 years, the wealthiest, most powerful men from all over the Greek world gathered there.
It was the ultimate networking event.
If you are a master armorer looking to sell a revolutionary new piece of military technology, setting up your forge at Olympia meant your potential customer base was walking right past your door.
You had aristocrats and mercenaries bringing in armor from all over the Mediterranean.
Allowing local smiths to study foreign designs, cross-pollinate ideas, and iterate rapidly.
It's basically the Silicon Valley of the 8th century BC.
Exactly. But how do we confidently lock down these dates? I mean, bronze doesn't inherently have a date stamp.
And radiocarbon dating doesn't work on inorganic metal.
So the dating mechanism relies heavily on the artistic record. Accurate representations of these early Illyrian helmets appear on Corinthian vases.
Which is a foundational technique in Bronze Age archaeology and classical antiquity studies. You cross-reference physical artifacts with contemporaneous artwork.
The painted pottery of Corinth, particularly the Proto-Corinthian and early Corinthian styles, is incredibly detailed.
And strictly datable based on stylistic evolution and stratigraphy.
When we see hoplites painted on a vase firmly dated to the late 7th century BC, wearing a specific helmet profile,
Open-faced, with cheek pieces extending forward.
it provides a hard chronological terminus. It proves the design was not only invented but had become standardized.
Culturally ubiquitous enough to be featured in standard artistic motifs well before 600 BC.
That sets the stage perfectly for the evolution of the helmet itself. The design didn't reach its final optimized form immediately.
Not at all. It took 2 full centuries of tweaking on the battlefield to perfect the balance between protection and sensory awareness.
Which brings us to the tech tree of ancient armor. Scholars break this down into 4 distinct chronological types.
Tracking these 4 types, Type I through Type IV, is essentially reading a 200-year-long after-action report from the ancient battlefield.
It shows us exactly what biomechanical and tactical problems the warriors were encountering.
And how the bronze smiths attempted to solve them through iterative design.
So we begin with Type I. This covers the period from roughly 700 to 640 BC. This initial iteration had 2 massive flaws.
First, it left the neck completely unprotected. The bronze basically stopped right at the base of the skull.
Second, and perhaps more critically, it severely hampered the wearer's hearing.
That sensory deprivation aspect is paramount to understanding ancient warfare.
The open-faced design of the Illyrian type meant it never obstructed the wearer's critical sense of vision. They maintained full peripheral sight.
Which is absolutely essential for maintaining the cohesion of a phalanx line. You need to see the guy next to you.
But the hearing issue in Type I was a major detriment. Imagine the acoustic environment of a hoplite battle.
You have thousands of men packed tightly together.
The clashing of bronze shields.
The snapping of wooden spear shafts.
The screams of the wounded, and the rhythmic chanting or singing used to keep the marching step.
If your ears are tightly enclosed by a thick sheet of bronze, you experience a dampening of external sound.
Combined with a horrifying amplification of your own breathing, your heartbeat, and the reverberation of your own footsteps.
You are visually present but acoustically isolated.
You cannot hear the specific auditory cues needed to survive, like the salpinks, the trumpet signaling a flanking maneuver.
Or just the shouted orders of your file leader. It creates a dangerous disconnect in a military formation where unit cohesion is literally the only thing keeping you alive.
If the man next to you receives an order to brace for impact and you don't hear it,
The enemy breaks the line through your position.
exactly. And furthermore, the lack of a neck guard in Type, I left a critical vulnerability to downward spear thrusts.
In hoplite combat, the primary weapon is the dory. It's an 8-foot spear typically thrust overhand above the rim of the shield.
An overhand thrust aims directly for the upper chest, throat, and neck.
The armorers recognize these fatal flaws, which brings us to Type 2, emerging around 600 BC.
The significant structural upgrade here is the addition of neck protection,
The smiths figured out how to extend the bronze downward and outward at the back.
creating a flared guard that would deflect a spear point away from the spine and the jugular.
But the acoustic problem persisted. Type 2 still hampered the warrior's hearing.
What's fascinating here is the geographical shift in the manufacturing of this new model.
Right, the Type I helmets were primarily developed in the northwestern Peloponnese, around that Olympia region.
But the first Type 2 helmets, the ones featuring this new life-saving neck guard, were created in Corinthian workshops.
Corinth was an absolute industrial powerhouse at this time. They were the center of the Greek world's arms trade.
It makes total sense that they would take a promising design from Olympia, identify its fatal flaw, the exposed neck, and use their massive manufacturing capabilities to hammer out an improved version.
They essentially stole the IP.
And upgraded it, mass-produced it.
Corinth had the capital and the skilled labor to drive this innovation. But the fact that they still couldn't solve the acoustic issue highlights the intense difficulty of bronze metallurgy.
You cannot simply cut a large hole over the ear to let sound in.
Cutting a hole introduces structural weakness. If a helmet takes a blunt force impact, a large cutout can cause the surrounding bronze to crumple or tear.
They had to figure out how to modify the shape without compromising the integrity of the dome.
And that breakthrough eluded the Greeks for another 50 years.
It isn't until we reach Type 3, emerging around 550 BC, that the acoustic puzzle is finally cracked.
Type 3 retains the essential neck protection introduced by the Corinthians, but it finally allows for better hearing.
The craftsmen achieved this by modifying the contours around the ear, likely flaring the bronze outward slightly or altering the cheek pieces.
To allow sound waves to travel into the ear canal without leaving the flesh entirely exposed.
But the most shocking aspect of Type 3 is where this breakthrough occurred.
The geography of this specific development is a testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient Mediterranean.
The earliest variants of Type 3, dating to the second half of the 6th century BC, do not belong to the workshops of Corinth.
Or Argos, or Olympia.
They belong to the production of workshops situated somewhere on the Illyrian coast of the Adriatic.
The technology traveled across the sea. The Greek colonists or merchants brought the Type 2 helmets up the Adriatic trade routes.
Perhaps trading them for Illyrian silver, timber, or slaves, and the local Illyrian craftsmen got their hands on them.
The Illyrians, a fiercely martial culture themselves, adopted the design but finally solved the engineering problem that had stumped the Greeks for over a century.
They figured out the acoustic modifications.
It perfectly illustrates that innovation is rarely isolated to a single core civilization. The periphery often takes an imported technology and refines it based on their own combat experiences.
The Illyrian coastal workshops essentially reverse-engineered the Greek helmet. They maintained the vital neck guard and finally solved the auditory dampening issue,
Creating a vastly superior piece of armor.
which culminates in the final stage of the tech tree, Type 4.
This rolls out around 500 BC. It is structurally similar to Type 3, but with the acoustic engineering completely perfected.
The sources state unequivocally that in Type 4, hearing was not impaired at all.
It took 2 full centuries of metallurgical trial and error, cross-cultural exchange, and battlefield testing.
From the vulnerable, deafening Type I in 700 BC to the acoustically perfect fully protective Type 5 in 500 BC.
It is a slow, grueling process of optimization. It's comparable to the slow evolution from chainmail to full articulated plate armor in the Middle Ages.
Every slight adjustment to the angle of the bronze, every millimeter of flaring around the ear, was written in the blood of the men who wore the previous flawed versions.
The sheer dedication to perfecting this specific open-faced design over 200 years proves how vital those auditory and visual cues were to ancient tacticians.
They could have easily abandoned it and universally adopted the Corinthian style.
But they valued the sensory awareness too much. They refused to compromise.
And that geographic journey from the Peloponnese to Corinth and finally up to the Adriatic coast is exactly what sets the stage for the massive academic controversy surrounding this artifact.
The naming controversy. This is where the intricacies of modern archaeological history clash with ancient reality.
Why is a helmet that was invented in the Peloponnese, upgraded in Corinth, and utilized heavily by Greek hoplites universally known today as the Illyrian helmet?
Well, the terminology is a byproduct of early, often rudimentary, archaeological practices. The helmet is named Illyrian today strictly for typological convenience.
During the 19th and early 20th centuries, as antiquarians and early archaeologists were conducting extensive excavations, a massive concentration of these specific helmets was discovered in the Balkan region.
Historically known as Illyria.
It's the trap of geographical bias in early archaeology. An expedition digs up dozens of these distinct, open-faced helmets in Illyrian graves.
And without the benefit of modern radiocarbon dating of the surrounding strata, or a comprehensive understanding of trade networks, they applied a simplistic label.
They found them in Illyria, therefore they must be Illyrian helmets.
They stamped the name in the catalog and it just stuck.
And this seemingly innocuous labeling error has created a century-long headache for scholars.
Naming conventions in archaeology carry immense weight. They imply origin, ethnicity, and cultural ownership.
But the names we use today, Illyrian, Corinthian, Chalcidian, Thracian, are entirely of modern origin.
An ancient Spartan or an ancient Illyrian never walked into a blacksmith shop and placed an order for an Illyrian-type IV.
Right. They likely just called it a helmet. Or perhaps referred to the specific smith who made it. The modern labels do not reflect contemporaneous ancient usage.
And because the label is factually misleading regarding the helmet's actual origins, the academic community has spent decades locked in a bitter turf war over what to call it.
It isn't just a matter of pedantry, it's about accurate historical attribution. The literature is littered with proposed alternative names attempting to correct the record without completely abandoning the established terminology.
You see scholars using hyphenated monstrosities like Greco-Illyrian or Greek-Illyrian.
The attempts at compromise in the nomenclature are revealing. You also see terms like Macedonian Illyrian, Greek Macedonian, and even the Paeonian helmet.
Referring to the Paeonians, another ancient people of the Balkans, it's an academic attempt to triangulate a name that satisfies both the geographical location of the finds and the cultural origin of the technology.
We can look at the specific arguments from prominent historians who have tackled this issue. Anthony Snodgrass, a titan in the study of early Greek armor, takes a hardline approach.
He states unequivocally that this is a purely Greek type.
He argues that it originated in the Peloponnese in the 7th century BC and only centuries later found its way to Illyria. He completely dismisses the ethnic implication of the name.
To Snodgrass, calling it Illyrian is historical malpractice.
Then you have scholars like Peter Connolly who take a more pragmatic, structuralist approach.
Connolly points out that terms like Illyrian and Attic are embedded in the archaeological lexicon purely for convenience. They denote a particular shape or silhouette of a helmet.
He argues that within the professional community, these terms do not imply its origin.
He's essentially saying that archaeologists know what the word means in this specific context, and we shouldn't upend the entire classification system just because the general public might misinterpret the etymology.
Rasko Vasic echoes that sentiment with an even more practical defense. Vasic argues for keeping the name Illyrian simply because it is the most widespread and recognizable.
He states it is short, practical, and there is no doubt which shape is in question. His justification is that any scholar actually acquainted with the subject knows perfectly well that the Greeks invented it.
Vasic is arguing for typological inertia. Once thousands of museum catalogs, university textbooks, and excavation reports have used a specific term for 100 years, changing it breaks the indexing of historical knowledge.
If you suddenly rename it the Peloponnesian open-faced Type B, a student researching the topic might miss a century of literature written under the old name.
It's a database management problem as much as an archaeological one.
But that doesn't alleviate the confusion for anyone outside that mixed circle of experts. Martina Blecic, another scholar analyzing this debate, highlights the painful slowness of academic paradigm shifts.
She notes that it took 20 years of new discoveries and rigorous data analysis for scholars to finally accept the name Illyrian predominantly as a territorial designation for where the artifacts were found.
Rather than a designation of the ethnicity of the creators, 20 years just to agree that the word means found in Illyria rather than made by Illyrians.
And she rightly points out that the resulting mess of outdated terminology and newly proposed hyphenated names is still causing severe confusion today.
This debate really forces you to evaluate how you consume historical information. When you walk through a museum and read a plaque, you are reading a highly condensed, often compromised label.
The word Illyrian in this context obscures a massive narrative of Greek invention, Corinthian industrialization, and cross-cultural trade.
It's a vital lesson in historical analysis. The map is not the territory, and the label is not the artifact.
Let's shift from the academic debate back to the ancient reality. Despite the Greek origins, the Illyrian people did eventually adopt this helmet with incredible enthusiasm.
That massive adoption is exactly why so many were found in their territory. But they weren't the only ones. This piece of military technology essentially became the ancient world's most sought-after export.
The proliferation of the Illyrian-type helmet is staggering. It was heavily utilized by the ancient Greeks throughout the Archaic and early classical periods.
But it also spread far beyond the Aegean. It was adopted by the Scythians, the nomadic horse archers of the Eurasian steppe.
And it found immense popularity in Italy among the Etruscans.
The spread to Italy is particularly fascinating because it demonstrates how military hardware becomes a symbol of elite status.
The Etruscans didn't just buy the helmets to fight in, they integrated the design into their luxury art.
We know this specifically from the Bernardini tomb at Praeneste, an incredibly wealthy Etruscan burial site.
The Bernardini tomb is a treasure trove of Orientalizing and Hellenizing art. Among the grave goods, archaeologists found intricate ivory reliefs and a stunning silver bowl.
Etched into these luxury items are depictions of warriors wearing the distinct, unmistakable silhouette of the Illyrian-type helmet.
So we aren't just finding the rusted, physical bronze in the dirt. We are finding the ancient equivalent of luxury branding.
The fact that the Etruscans were carefully carving the specific profile of this open-faced, neck-guarded helmet into expensive ivory and silver demonstrates that it had become a cultural motif.
Emmeline Hill Richardson, a prominent Etruscan scholar, notes that Etruria heavily adopted Greek military aesthetics, specifically naming the Cretan or Illyrian helmet and the hoplite shield.
If you were a wealthy Etruscan prince, depicting yourself or your ancestors in this specific Greek-style armor was a way of projecting power, sophistication, and connection to the broader Mediterranean elite.
It was the tactical gear of its day, highly functional, but also highly fashionable.
And when we look at the physical artifacts that have survived across different regions, we see how diverse cultures added their own unique metallurgical flair to the base design.
The regional variations are incredible. In its Greek homeland, we have pristine examples like a Greco-Illyrian type bronze helmet from Argos.
Dating to the 6th and 5th centuries BC, this represents the helmet at the absolute peak of its use within the Greek hoplite phalanx.
But then you follow the trade routes north into the Balkans. We find a high concentration of them in modern-day Montenegro.
There are finds from Budva, dating to the 4th century BC, and even an Upper Bronze Age context helmet from Klitschevo.
The sheer chronological and geographical range of these finds proves how deeply the design penetrated the martial cultures of the Adriatic and the Balkans.
But perhaps the most striking visual artifact demonstrating the cultural adaptation of this armor comes from much further afield in Timus, Romania.
The Timus helmet is a masterpiece. It dates between the 6th and 4th centuries BC.
By the time this design reached the territory of modern Romania, likely into the hands of Thracian or Getae nobility, it was no longer just a functional piece of bronze meant to deflect a sword blow.
It had become a canvas. The Timus helmet is uniquely decorated. It features the embossed image of a horseman, and it is adorned with 6 rose petal decorations.
The iconography here is deeply significant. The horseman is a recurring motif in Thracian art, often associated with a hero or a deity, symbolizing martial prowess and aristocratic status.
And the rose petal decorations, often associated with solar or floral motifs in regional indigenous art, show a complete localized customization.
The local armorers took the perfected Greek and Illyrian acoustic and structural design and overlaid it with their own deep cultural and religious symbolism.
It's the ultimate expression of how technology travels. It starts in the Peloponnese as a desperate, flawed innovation to protect a soldier's neck without deafening him.
It gets refined over 200 years.
It is exported via merchant ships to Italy and the Adriatic.
And finally, it ends up deep in Eastern Europe, covered in indigenous religious iconography, worn by a chieftain who has likely never even seen the Peloponnese.
It perfectly illustrates the life cycle of a successful technology. But, as with all military technology, the life cycle eventually demands obsolescence.
Tactical realities of warfare dictate that no armor remains supreme forever.
So what forces the end of the Illyrian helmet's reign? The timeline of its decline is just as fascinating as its rise, and it reveals a massive disconnect between the core civilization that invented it and the peripheral cultures that adopted it.
The helmet became obsolete in most parts of Greece in the early 5th century BC.
Let's contextualize that date. Type by V, the acoustically perfect ultimate evolution of the design, rolls out around 500 BC.
That is the very beginning of the 5th century.
So almost immediately after the Greek and Adriatic armorers finally perfect the design after 200 years of struggle, the Greek city-states begin abandoning it.
It's a brutal irony of engineering.
Why did the Greeks discard it right as they perfected it?
It comes down to the changing nature of Greek warfare. The early 5th century is the era of the Persian Wars.
The massive clashes at Marathon, Thermopylae, and Plataea changed how the Greeks fought.
The rigid, heavy hoplite phalanx was still central, but there was an increasing need for lighter, more mobile troops, peltasts, and skirmishers.
Furthermore, new helmet designs like the Chalcidian and Thracian types were emerging.
These newer designs offered better peripheral vision, lighter weight, and different balances of protection that suited the evolving tactics better than the heavy, restrictive Illyrian type.
The core region, Greece, had reached the absolute metallurgical limit of what the Illyrian design could offer.
They needed a paradigm shift, so they discarded the old technology and moved on to the next innovation.
But the periphery, the Illyrian tribes who had adopted the helmet so enthusiastically, were operating under different tactical and cultural pressures.
The Illyrians weren't ready to let it go.
While the Greeks abandoned it in the early 5th century, the Illyrians continued forging, wearing, and being buried in these helmets until the 4th century BC.
They held on to the technology for an entire century longer.
This is a classic pattern of technology transfer. A core region invents a technology, maximizes its potential, and moves on.
The peripheral regions, which may not have the same rapid rate of tactical evolution or the same centralized industrial capacity to constantly retool their armories, retain the older technology.
The Illyrians had deeply integrated the helmet into their martial identity. It worked perfectly well for the type of tribal warfare and raiding they engaged in, so there was no immediate pressure to replace it.
And this century-long lag in obsolescence is the exact reason for the entire modern naming controversy.
Because the Illyrians kept using it for an extra 100 years, and because their elite warriors were buried with their armor during that later period, the archaeological strata in the Balkans were packed with these helmets.
The timeline of its use perfectly explains the geographical bias in the archaeological record.
The Greeks invented it, used it, and then likely melted down their old Illyrian helmets to forge the newer Chalcidian types.
The Illyrians kept them and took them to their graves.
When 19th century archaeologists started digging, they found the Illyrian graves, not the melted-down Greek armories.
It is a brilliant full-circle realization of how survivorship bias dictates historical narratives.
Let's bring all these threads together. We started with a physical artifact, a gleaming, solid bronze, open-faced helmet.
We tracked its birth from the riveted Kegelhelms of Argos to the high-tech, single-sheet bronze workshops of ancient Olympia.
Over 2 grueling centuries, we explored the acoustic physics of the hoplite phalanx, watching ancient engineers painstakingly add neck guards in Corinth and modify ear holes on the Adriatic coast.
Just so a soldier could hear a command over the din of battle.
We traced its viral expansion across the ancient world, analyzing how it was transformed from functional armor into a status symbol, carved into Etruscan ivory in Italy, and embossed with localized Thracian rose petals in Romania.
And finally, we dismantled the modern academic controversy.
We uncovered the deep historiographical irony of why modern archaeologists named a purely Greek invention after the Illyrian people.
Simply because the Illyrians loved the design so much, they kept using it a century after the Greeks had moved on.
It is a massive continent-spanning story of engineering and culture, all hidden inside the shape of a single piece of bronze.
The story of the Illyrian helmet is the ultimate lesson in survivorship bias and geographical luck in the archaeological record. We misnamed a Greek invention because of where it happened to be discarded last.
It leaves you with a really compelling thought experiment, doesn't it?
It really does. Consider the physical objects you interact with every day, the technology sitting on your desk or the vehicle in your driveway. What common artifacts from our current civilization will be dug up thousands of years from now, far from where it was manufactured or primarily used, and completely confidently misnamed by future historians based purely on the random geographical luck of where they happen to excavate it?
It is entirely possible they will find a discarded espresso machine in a research station in Antarctica and spend decades arguing over the Antarctic bean crusher culture.
That is highly likely.
Thank you for joining us as we mapped out this incredible piece of ancient military history. Keep questioning the labels on the history you consume, look past the museum placards, and we will catch you next time for another deep dive.